Welcome to today's episode, the podcast where we discuss the most recent installments of a different series every show. It's Monday, Cinco de Mayo. Last week, we reviewed Étoile, an American-French series on Amazon. Today, we return to Paris to give our thoughts on Carême, the first celebrity chef. The series is on Apple TV+. The premiere episodes, The Infernal Machine and Blackmail, cover the late stages of Carême's early career in post-revolutionary France.
Since you read the book, I was hoping you could give context to the facts I have
This is
here.
based on a book. It's based on a cookbook/biography.
Right, and like you said, Carême, he was a major influence to the world of cooking.
Do you want to say what the name of the book is? Cooking for Kings, The Life of Antonin Carême, the First Celebrity Chef by Ian Kelly.
Yeah,
I would highly recommend it.
Incredibly long title, but I know that they go over some things here, so I just kind of wanted you to give some more context to it. Like, first, he was the first celebrity chef.
Yes, that's what I said in the intro.
Right, but like, what does that exactly mean?
So, like, people would hire him out by the end of his career just to get higher in public status. The Rothschilds were the ones that they pointed out to specifically. They were like the richest family in the world. They were richer than kings and empires, but they could get no one to hang out with them because they were new money. And like we learned in the Gilded Age, old money didn't like new money. But when they found out that Carême was cooking, everybody wanted to be part of that party. So they would have like 18 guests per dinner every single day. And so that's why he was a celebrity by the end. Also, he wrote all these cookbooks, which made him like widely famous around the world, along with the fact that he was paid like freaking LeBron James is now. Like it's insane how much money he was making as a cook back in the day.
Yeah, and I think that he was like one of his cookbooks was the first to kind of like be ran by second person, or it's like you can do this at home or something like that.
Yeah, he would even add little illustrations, and he was kind of knocked for his illustrations in his first cookbook. So he went back, and I think he either resubmitted that first edition, or in the second book, he hired someone to help him out with the drawings.
So he was the first to also treat cooking as an art form by architectural principles. Is that true?
So like extraordinaires is what he calls them, or what it was called at the time. Centerpieces, basically these huge desserts that they could make look into candelabras, or in the TV show, they make them look like statues, kind of is a cake of that day. So like, again, people would walk in there, they wouldn't necessarily even eat these things, but they would admire them. And some of them survived even past Carême's death. That's how like well known they were. They kept them around, and so they kept on putting them out during parties and being like, "That's a Carême piece."
And I know that you said that he wasn't political, but
I
they
didn't say that. We haven't gotten to the show yet.
They
But
talk about how he combined politics with his food back in the day.
right, so he would entertain for a lot of guests that were world leaders or people who had just come out of war, and so obviously his pieces would incorporate something that they would like. However, himself, like, he hated war. A lot of the people he looked up to as mentors, they would be called away during the war times to cook for the armies, and they wouldn't come back. And so he hated the premise of like losing that art form for no good reason, for people losing their lives. And so he didn't care if he was cooking for Napoleon or the Tsar of Russia, whoever like overthrew who. He was more just doing it for the money, and also the fact that he just loved food.
And I felt like we had to start off with some facts about the actual Carême, because when you talk about Martin Barbelon, he's the person that directed all the episodes. He said he found his own vision of the story, and he was trying to find the right balance from the realistic thing and the believable thing. Ian Kelly, who created the book and the series, said this is not a documentary. And the New York Times even said the show has a loose relationship to historical facts.
Yeah. I have my complaints and where the show embellishes, and I was curious about what Ian Kelly thought, because they didn't call this a series that was inspired by his book. They said that it was based off his book.
Right.
And that would kind of really rubbed me the wrong way as the author, right? And a few other things for context of the series. A, it's an entirely French production. So unlike Étoile, where that was a hybrid format, you had a mix of English and French going on. This only had like one line of English, and it was kind of just a shot out line. But mostly, if you're going to watch it just the normal French style, unless you want to listen with the Apple dub. It's also, you said, based on the book, but Apple is pretty successful usually with their adaptations of historical dramas. Look at Masters of the Air. I gave that a very positive review after reading the book. Manhunt. I know you weren't as big a fan of that, but it's gotten good reviews. You know, like it seems like they adapted the book.
And I remember you liked at least the second episode.
Yes, and then Lessons in Chemistry was based off a fictional period piece, but it still was an adaptation of a book that they pulled off, and it has like an 8 point something on IMDb, right? So let's talk about these first two episodes. The first one is called The Infernal Machine, episode 1. It's 44 minutes long. Antonin Carême, he is in the kitchen, and what would he be doing? Cooking, baking, checking a recipe? No, he's having sex with his girlfriend on the floor of a pastry shop. And they get interrupted by the shop owner, who you would think would be mad, his mentor, Sylvian Bailey.
Well, I wanted to actually talk about that because Burbelon, he said that the first scene was very intentional. It was supposed to incorporate the three main themes of the series: food, sex, and politics.
Yes. And if you read the book, sex is like it's for other people. Like Talleyrand is a big promiscuous dude. Like he had a lot of concubines and their orgies and stuff like that happen, but not really Kareem style. Like Kareem was way more into the cooking aspect. But so Sylvain Bailey chuckles when he finds them on the floor of his shop having sex amongst the dough. And he says, we've got a dinner to prepare for Napoleon's here. He's in town. And so they jump to the evening. They're downstairs. Everybody's working hard, and the festivities are in full swing when Antonin Kareem is pulled away to deliver ice. And then he finds himself in front of a nearly catatonic Napoleon Bonaparte.
Mm-hmm.
And you know this because he sees his hat.
And does he actually cook for Napoleon Bonaparte? Was that something that happened?
Yeah, he cooked for his wedding, but that's much later on. But what's the boy genius going to do? Because he's seeing this guy who's suffering and people are freaking out because they just won a war. This is the emperor. He mashes some herbs together and he rubs them on his back and he cures the emperor. Like if this was a video game, you just earned yourself some points. But emboldened with the fact that you just saved this guy, instead of going back and doing his job, he walks out in front of the army and he just throws down some of Napoleon's guards. He starts punching, and it's very unclear why. I don't know, but the next day he's back at his shop.
Well, if we could talk about that, that was the most insane scene because it cuts to the intro, but right before the intro, he starts laughing like maniacally. It felt like he was like not in his right mind, like he was crazy.
So there's a lot of reasons why people acted weird back then. Like they had lead-based makeup, they had mercury poisoning. They didn't realize like what. There's a lot of reasons he could be acting weird, but this is never brought up in the book. But especially him like walking in with just a pig's head and then throwing it on the table and then just start punching guards. Like what cause does he have for that? But the next morning, he's saved the emperor. He's had this fight. He's working at the patisserie with Bailey. And again, he's his apprentice. So like Kareem back in the day, when he was 8 years old, he was abandoned by his parents. He was like the 16th kid out of like 20-some kids. So it wasn't that uncommon. This is post-revolutionary France. It's Les Miserables times. And he walks into Bailey's place. He's working on his thing. He has a black eye now to show that like he had a fun night. And then Kareem's like number 2 guard, the one who had fetched him to fetch ice, right? He comes in and he says, you got to go work for Napoleon now. And Kareem says, absolutely not. I like what I do here. And so then they arrest his mentor. And it's all these trumped up charges, basically like you spoke ill against Napoleon. And they're just trying to kind of hedge Kareem into being forced into Napoleon's service.
Yeah, right.
Kareem goes straight to this Bishop Talleyrand guy. And Bishop Talleyrand, think of him like Littlefinger from Game of Thrones. He's got his fingers in everyone's pockets. He's a diplomat.
Evil?
No, he was actually big friends with Kareem in the book. In this, he's a lot more plot worthy, and he's like doing a lot of more, as you were saying, like sinister stuff. Talleyrand sizes up Kareem, and he says, and he's much older, so he sizes the kid up. He can tell with his youthful ambition and his desire to get the proxy father out of jail that Kareem is willing to do anything. He'll go work at Napoleon's kitchens, he'll seduce Napoleon's wife, and he'll impress Napoleon's guests. So Talleyrand is going to use him as an agent. And by the end of the episode, Kareem has unwittingly helped Talleyrand stage a bombing to kill Napoleon, just so Talleyrand could save Napoleon by letting him know that there was a plot to kill him, and then further get into his good graces.
Where does the cooking come into play? That's what Kareem is like known for.
There are cooking scenes where he's in the kitchen, and it's basically him going to Napoleon's kitchen or Talleyrand's kitchen and learning how to chop onions and making friends with not Agatha, but she has like an E at the end of her name. Yeah. And in real life, he married a woman named Agatha, but in real life, there were also no women in the kitchens back then. Like not in that station.
Right.
Like that was more of a domestic thing. So this was completely embellished for the show, but there is cooking. I don't want to pretend that there's not. Jumping into the second episode, or do you have any questions?
Well, I was just going to add that voice in Alice Deleuze, who played Agatha, worked at the Ferrande School of Cuisine for 2 months, which reminded me a lot of Jeremy Allen White, who I know worked with actual chefs typecast for his role of Carmine the bear.
It's a straight ripoff of that character, of Ito Adaberry's character, and that's the only reason they added it to this show. I'm like 99% positive to it, and it kind of upsets me.
Well, you've also talked about how you're pretty sure Kareem was just that's who they're paying homage to in the bear because the
Right.
main character's name is Carmi.
Carmi is absolutely more like Kareem than Kareem is in this series.
Well, that definitely is a statement.
Because what is Carmi in the bear? You've seen
He's a chef.
No, but what is he obsessed with?
Well, food.
Right? And like every single thing needs to be perfect.
And I remember you saying, well, in season 3, the biggest plot point is that he's having to change his menu or wants to change his menu every single day. And I think that you said Kareem did kind of something similar. Right. So that just adds more fuel to that fire.
They kind of mentioned that in the first episode because Kareem gets to the kitchen and he's working on the thing and he finds out that every single day they're making the same stuff. And he's like, why are we doing that? And so you can tell that they're already putting the little grounds. By the end of the second episode, he's the head chef. He's already taken over.
Right. So the beginning of episode 2.
Yeah, episode 2, Kareem is fed up with Talleyrand's antics. He feels like he's being used in a messed up game of chess, which he is. So he threatens Talleyrand twice, once at knife point and then once in his study. And basically he's like, you help me with Bailey or you're going to regret it. And so at the same time, while he's in the kitchen, he's like the main chef now, so the ladies love him. So every girl that he's like giving food to looks at him with like these sultry eyes, like, I want to fuck you. Like, it's the weirdest thing. Then opportunity falls in his lap to get back at Talleyrand because Henrietta, his main girlfriend, the one from the first scene of the show, she shows up and she's like, she pulls him aside and she's like, I need you to work your like miracle medicine, which comes out of left field because, again, that's not what Kareem did. He wasn't some snake oil salesman. He didn't have like an ability to just conjure potions. But he puts on the medicine hat again and he goes and he cures Talleyrand's secret bastard daughter. So he's been housing this girl who he didn't want to tell Napoleon about or really have anybody know about because she has a hurt ankle.
I'm sorry, I don't want to go back, but just really fast, just to know who Talleyrand is. Was he the one at the beginning of the second episode?
I mean, he's pretty
like,
close to the
inspecting the scene, like the very beginning.
Inspecting? No, you might be thinking of the investigator, the minister of police. That's Joseph Fouché.
Yeah, he reminded me a lot of like Vicious from Cowboy Bebop.
Oh,
He seems, but yeah, sorry. Anyways,
no, Talleyrand's a good guy ultimately, but they have yet to like really, really bond. So Kareem does save his daughter. However, he does out Talleyrand to the minister of police, that Joseph Fouché. And that guy looks weird in the show, but he also looked weird in real life, if you want to look up a photo of him. And that guy is investigating the bombing, and he also is very close to Napoleon. So he pays Talleyrand a visit, and he's like, I know about your secret daughter. The reason why that's a big deal is that Talleyrand isn't married. And as soon as Napoleon, this is a bit of history, so I do give the credit to the show for at least following this track. When Napoleon became emperor, him and Josephine were not in the best relationship. Like, she was barren. And so there was a lot of talk of whether or not they were going to get divorced then. They ended up getting divorced later. But at the time, Josephine didn't want to lose the power of that relationship, even though she wasn't a big fan of Napoleon. And so what she did was she kind of outed the idea of let's make divorce illegal. Because back in the day, if you're being really conservative, that's what it was. It was like once you're in a marital pact, there's very few ways out of it.
Even in the 1800s. Wow. Okay.
Right. And so having this bastard child when you're also trying to defend divorce to Napoleon really looks bad. Like, he couldn't have him think anything less of him while Josephine is in the other ear. And so when his position is severely weakened, Talleyrand's position is, when Fouché finds out about it and he threatens to tell Napoleon. And so Talleyrand is also not happy. He figures out that Kareem is the one who spilled the beans, and he goes and he sets up to fire Kareem. But then, of course, they end up plotting together, and it's this weird issue where like Talleyrand agrees to get married to the woman that gave birth to the girl that Kareem had saved. And during that marriage ceremony, which Kareem is to host, right, or to like cook for, he is to then also seduce Josephine, Napoleon Bonaparte's wife, have sex with her during the party's orgy, because of course all parties are going to have orgies. And if she doesn't agree to help them while they're having sex, she has to agree. And or else they're going to bring in her daughter blindfolded and Napoleon Bonaparte's brother blindfolded and kind of just take the wool over their eyes and expose the fact that Kareem and Josephine are having this affair against this block of ice, mind you. And that's why the episode is called Blackmail, because by the end of it, Josephine falls into the trap. She confirms that she will help them save divorce in France so that everyone will still be able to get divorced. But then at the same time, she wants to like kill Kareem.
Is Kareem a good guy in this show? Because he sells out Talleyrand. He threatens to do that.
Well, he was only selling out Talleyrand because he felt like he'd been manipulated by him. Once they were on the same page, and Talleyrand has given the full explanation that the reason he's trying to, or he had to keep this daughter a secret was because he's trying to save a divorce in France, then they were all like happy with each other, and I guess they're on the same side. As well as by the end of the episode, Talleyrand is shown faking a note to Kareem from the proxy father, Sylvian Bailey or whatever.
Right.
So that Kareem thinks he feels pacified. He feels like action is being done and that Talleyrand is living up to his side of the bargain, which is to get that guy out of jail. And at the same time, the minister of police, the Fouché guy, has also kind of matched the handwriting and realized that Kareem was the person who plotted to kill Napoleon, but he hasn't like figured out exactly who Kareem is.
Okay,
Yes.
so if you if you had to compare this show to anything else, what would they be?
Not many. There wouldn't. I mean, Dangerous Liaisons. Maybe. It's less about the comparisons and it's more about comparing it to the book. I do want to highlight the things that they got right. Kareem did rise from the bottom, and they mentioned that in the show. He does love to do extraordinaires, which are those centerpieces. He loves architecture, patisserie work, or pastry shop work, right? So like he loves pastries, and he even opens a pastry restaurant, which I don't think is too much of a spoiler later on
Right.
in his life, like his late teens. There was no refrigeration back then, so all the focus on ice everywhere makes a lot of sense. Drawing, writing, if the guy was not cooking, he was always doing one of those other things, but it was always about food. He was a self-taught reader. Bailey did take him in. However, he left his practice when he was like 15 years old to go work for Talleyrand. There was no well, I'll get into my stuff that they changed later. But the underground kitchens were also true because there were all those fumes that would collect, CO2, the coal that they were working with. A lot of chefs didn't live very long because they were breathing that in all the time.
Right, yeah.
He quickly made a name for himself. So it's true that at this young age, you might see him flaunting about, like, how is he the best cook at this? Well, that's true. He was really, really, really good and respected. He did work for Talleyrand. He met most of the royals at one point or another. So when you're also seeing that interaction happening, it's not unheard of. It's just the fact that he wouldn't then sleep with them. And he was the head chef during countless occasions of extravagant, exuberant, opulent, gratuitously rich parties. So that's what I was looking forward to seeing, sort of a Gilded Age reminiscent type deal when we would see these presentations of food. I just thought it would be more about the actual presentation of seeing these cool parties.
Well, yeah, I mean, he would work for 14 to 16 hours
Right,
per
because the
day.
stoves sometimes took a really long time to even start up. Like he would take this gig, and he was a freelance guy for a long time, and he would get there and he would be in control of all the staff, but they could only work as fast as, the stoves would cook the meals, and
And
he would have huge menus.
And when you were just talking about kind of like how bad the kitchens were, I know that the production spent 6 weeks, but they even knew that they like kind of spaced it out a little bit because the kitchens back then were just so cramped and
Even in the
smoky.
mansions, right? They would just stuff them downstairs. And as the parties got bigger, as they wanted to become more glamorous, that's the only time when they started creating kitchens upstairs where the fumes had somewhere to go other than back into the people that were making the stuff, So it was only near the end of Kareem's life where he would really work in a lot of places that had air ability, where he could breathe in fresh air at the same time. Yeah, some believe that part of it was long-term CO2 poisoning that ended up getting him, that and cholera. But yeah, what the show embellishes, it got wrong, and my frustrations with the show starting now. This depiction of Kareem is so off from what it reads like in the book. I don't know what he looked like in real life. There are some portraits of him, but like I don't really care what he looked like, what they could have made him look like in the show. But his attitude is just so mishandled, and it's an insult to reality because he's portrayed here as this unhygienic, sex-obsessed, plotting, spying deviant who spends his time sticking his fingers into people's mouths, more doing that than he does cooking. And then, like you said, the real Kareem, mostly apolitical. He was a friend to Talleyrand. He had no problems with the law. Like he was never accused of trying to kill Napoleon. His mentor was never arrested. He didn't fuck everything around him. He didn't have this side gig as a miracle healer. He didn't meet Napoleon by saving his life or become an escort to Josephine or roofie her or promote the first female head chef of France and then marry her later on. All of that is just made up gook.
It confused me a little bit because Wall Street Journal said that this version of Kareem was like a mix between Thomas Shelby and Forrest Gump, and I was like, that's not really food related. Then I saw people being like, it's a cross between the Bear and the Bourne Identity, and I was like, Bourne Identity? This is just so
They're
strange.
just talking about that fight scene where he just like, again, threw down.
But yeah, historian Pierre Ray, she said, because she read the screenplay, even though she didn't consult for the series, said there was a number of errors. He wasn't a spy. He wouldn't go to Vienna until 1821, long after the fall of the empire. He wasn't a great seducer. Like I said, like you were kind of saying.
He traveled a lot, so I didn't really care. Like the places they were mentioning, there's so many in the book that could have been true or false. I wasn't paying too much attention to that. He was much more like Carmi from The Bear, though, in real life, and I wish they had portrayed him that way because that's a cool character. And I think they've proven that can be successful in the television show. You didn't need to make it just sex. And I feel like it was more just because they thought they were pulling in a certain audience by gearing it that way. Also, like how could he possibly be a teenager, a world-renowned pastry chef, if he's spending all his time doing all these other duplicitous activities, and getting punched in the face and beat up, like, rather than studying like he was in real life?
I know he
makes
took
sense.
Benjamin Voisin, who played Kareem, took inspiration from Mick Jagger and Lenny Kravitz.
Right. Well, we'll get to his portrayal in a second. I do have something to say about that, which I think goes to that point. At his age, he was just a freelancer. Like he would sometimes had, I think, some certain galas, but like he was more interested in who he got to learn from. So that would have been a cool way to spend these episodes, is him bouncing around to all these other famous mentors of his. Because just because he's the first celebrity chef doesn't mean he was the first like great chef or famous chef, because his like biggest hero died like 100 or 200 years earlier, Valet or Valette. And that guy like got so upset with himself for messing up the seafood at a certain huge party that he was throwing that he took a sword and he just shish kebabbed himself through the stomach. That's how that guy died.
Yeah.
And so that was one of his the people that he looked up to. But yeah, the first few years were him bouncing around to a lot of places, just trying to learn things. Kind of like Carmi, and how you saw him going to other restaurants and enjoying or not enjoying, because sometimes they would berate him, but learning the craft, right?
Right.
And then when he wasn't in the kitchen, he was always writing his cookbooks or his architecture books. They gave him a big pirate earring in this series. That's the Mick Jaggerness of it. They tried to make him cool. There's no record of him ever having a pirate ring, or like having all his buttons undone in the first part of it. Like they tried to make him into like some sort of sex dude who was just trying to be cool.
I mean, I know that the guy has he's actually gotten some praise for his role, but it didn't seem like he even really looked, at least from the drawings, like Kareem.
To bring it back to the hygiene, like this guy is sticking his fingers in people's mouths. They're having sex against the food, against the ice that's being prepared, and he's smearing ingredients on people and treating it like he's God's gift to humanity. In real life, Kareem is the dude who created that top white hat. And that could mean nothing to you, but like, that giant white hat that chefs wear?
Chefs wear, yeah.
Yes. He put the cardboard in it to make it taller. As ridiculous as that sounds, he did it for a reason. He wanted to promote the idea that kitchens were like hospitals. They were like the ideal hospital. They were super clean, clinically clean. Like there was not. And so think about how like disgusting it is that your reputation now is that you were just having sex all over the place in those, like that's the, yes. So this less about Kareem. Also, the glamorizing of 1800s France is sexy. We've seen it on a lot of TV shows, but you have to understand that these people just got out of a war. It's Les Miserables times. were afraid of baths back then. They used to think that opening your pores with like water
Right.
would cause disease. Their version of makeup was throwing a big pie of lead-based powder in your face, and then painting over it. They weren't all Victoria's Secret models playing Renaissance
Well,
fair.
I'm surprised to hear you say that because one of the things the show has gotten praise for as well is not only the costumes, which they made over 1,000 from scratch,
Yeah, that's impressive, but it's not
but
true.
also the places that they shot. I
Yeah,
mean,
it
like,
looked cool.
and with like 3,000 candles to light all the candelabras, and they had like 60 to choose from. And they
I
chose
don't see how
12.
that has anything to do with the fact that people back then were probably a lot more ugly than they're portrayed now.
Well,
It's Hollywood. I get it. I'll give him a pass for that. It's less about Kareem, like I said in that point. One thing that is unforgivable though is like you said it yourself. They in the book made it so clear that if there was one theory out there, some crazy conspiracy, it was that he was a spy, and they debunked it. They were like, it's absolutely false. He was only ever considered a spy when he went to Russia because of how crazy it was that he ended up serving so many royals and stuff just by being associated with so many leaders over the time made him kind of suspicious just because it's like could you possibly if you weren't somehow a spy. That was the only rumor, and they again killed it in the book, and yet the adaptation being sold from the book is trying to not just propagate but sell the idea that he was a spy. How would you like to spend so much time? I still feel so bad for Ian Kelly to write something saying this guy absolutely was just obsessed with food. He was a great chef, and at the same time he was not a spy. And then they show him as like this sex obsessed fiend who was really into food, or that who was really into spying.
it reminds me a lot of like A Beautiful Mind, kind of, at least with the first hour of that, kind of the spy thing, and then that got debunked later. But yeah, in the TV series, I know that that was just a rumor that they ended up deciding to go with here.
It was one line, yeah.
I feel like what happened was they just were like, okay, there's this famous person named Kareem, but just instead of like focusing on food, because that is kind of the bear anyways, let's just fill it with a ton of stuff. Let's fill it with sex. Let's fill it with like a lot of just spy thrillerness so we can make it more exciting. When it seems like to you, you just wanted it to be more like the book. My question is, I know it's going to be hard to do, but separating the content from the book, would this series still be good? Just if you were to watch the pilot alone.
Probably not that great. Like again, I feel like having seen The Bear, can I still compare it to
Yeah,
that?
yeah.
Like it would have felt a little bit of a ripoff from that for the kitchen scenes, and it wouldn't have been as good because it doesn't show the commitment as much as just cut shots of like people tasting food and stuff. And again, Ito Adibiri's character,
I would agree.
Io
Yeah.
Adibiri's character feels too much like this. Like Agatha is a ripoff of that. So no, I don't think that. If it was just the show and I hadn't read the book, I'd probably give it a 5 out of 10. Um, I do want to give my favorite fact from the book before I go into my
Sure.
ultimate
Yeah.
rating. But like, I found it really funny that I read 300 pages of this thing, and I had to skip through a lot of the recipes because they were so long, and there was really like half the ingredients you don't know, and they were only trying to prove the point that like he would host these extraordinary galas and stuff.
Right.
And so by the end of it, it gets to it, and it says, so if you try any of these recipes, they might end up a little bland or maybe a little bit too sweet. So keep in mind, this is just a product of its time. And so it's like all, and it makes sense. But I did find that hilarious. So yeah, my ultimate thing is if you're tuning in for an alternative history take where the main character is a young genius, everything he does is Casanova-ish style, and he's a Michelangelo with cake. It's like that. They literally did something that looked like Michelangelo that could have been in Is It Cake?
It's a cake, yeah.
Yes. But this is the show for you. Like, that's the person who should tune into this.
And I know
Otherwise-
that the people working on it, I just need to re-clarify, the people working on it know that. They have said that this is not in any way really like how it actually was.
Well, then the criticism is deserved, because if you're not going to follow a book that you literally are saying it's based on, then it's going to be a recipe for disaster, which happens to be the title for the next episode of the series, episode 3. And like episode 3, I will be giving this a 3 out of 10. If someone were to turn this in as a book report and say this is Kareem, they would get some like credit for the fact that, yes, he mentioned extraordinaires a couple times, and Yeah, there was, but like overall, it's just an F.
I know there's only one more fact I have that was kind of different from
hmm
what the show made it seem like. Kareem was never hired full time by Talleyrand. He worked on an on demand basis.
A freelance worker, but he worked a lot with Talleyrand. So Talleyrand was like his emissary or his agent. He would literally bring him in to introduce him to like all these famous people, all these leaders, and those leaders would then like. So I am surprised that he didn't work directly for Talleyrand or his house.
Well, despite your 3 out of 10, this has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. The
Mm.
Guardian gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The Wall Street Journal said Kareem is confusing but mostly fun. The show's charm being contained in the food, and it was shot in Paris over 8 months.
Why does it have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes?
I don't think a lot
Did
of people have
anybody
read the book.
book?
It has a 6.3 on IMDb.
Yeah,
So,
this guy reminded me a little bit of Hamilton. Again, he was like obsessed with if he wasn't in the kitchen, right. And so he ended up releasing all these cookbooks, making a name for himself that way. That's why he was a celebrity. And so like it's kind of a tragic story, the fact that like even now he hasn't gotten his full credit, like adaptations worth.
and I think he died relatively young, right?
Like in his 40s.
Yeah.
And his daughter got rid of like all his letters to her and stuff, which killed off a lot of like how he acted. So you can say the show is allowed to embellish some stuff. And yes, if you want to give him the earring and say he had an earring, he walked around and he had a lot more sex than you thought. But don't like, I don't know, just throw in every possible random stuff and don't make him a spy. Anyways, thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.